audience.
Right.
Some join. So I'm sure a few more will come along. And
Okay.
then this is also being relayed on LinkedIn. So let me just see how many have. Yeah, a few have joined there on LinkedIn. So you are there at both. So um, at both these places. So I let me start. So, sir, a very good afternoon to you, and it is such a pleasure to have someone of your stature and accomplishments as our guest on the series.
My pleasure.
Thank you, thank you. Um, Frankly, in an hour-long podcast, to do justice with the introduction of someone of Mr. Gurcharan Das's, range of work, it is not going to be easy. But in the introduction part, with your permission, I'll be very brief because many of these we will be talking about in the course of our conversation as well. So, normally people begin from the latest to the earliest. I want to reverse. I want to reverse it because, the little bit that I got to know during this, the preparatory work of mine, I think Mr. Gurcharan Das's life has been as eventful, from his days as a child as it continues to be even now. So let me begin from the beginning. uh, Someone whom teachers in the school, early school, found little difficult to cope. Then since his father got posted to Washington, D.C., he landed there for the higher level of schooling. They admitted him there more to, if I may say, second tier of the stream so that he could go to for the vocational education, only to realize that by the time he finished his school there, uh, he had come out right on top, and Washington Post did a write-up on him saying that here is a boy from India who has secured scholarship from this school for Harvard University and a few other Ivy League universities, in US. It was a similar story when he studied at uh, Harvard University. After giving his share of challenges to his teachers and professors, he finally graduated with distinction and was admitted to what is called a very coveted group, Phi Beta Kappa, for people with exceptional, academic accomplishments. So that's how he ended at Harvard. Corporate career began as a trainee selling Vicks Vaporub, and then went on to become managing director of the then Richardson Hindustan. And then when it was taken over by Procter & Gamble, he took charge as the CEO of Procter & Gamble India. From there onwards, to the managing director of strategic planning unit for Procter & Gamble global headquarters. And talking a little more about corporate side, there are three case studies featuring Mr. Gurcharan Das in the Harvard Business School. He's a speaker to the large corporates around the world. He contributes to Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and of course, Regular Times of India for a very long time, and many others. The third part of his life, the literary contribution, if I may say, uh, you know, uh, it's something that is still continuing good after 3 decades, and the whole range and the body of work is such that I'm yet to really get a proper handle on it. But then there are books, there are, his work in fiction, non-fiction, plays, um, one of the first non-fiction books that Mr. Gurcharan Das wrote, and we'll be talking about it during the course of conversation, India Unbound, was such a path-breaking book that it got translated in 19 languages, and BBC made a film on this book. And of course, there are other books and plays. Um, and when he was in the peak of his career towards the end of 1994-95, he decided to leave and took to full-time writing. And he continues to write. And the last book, which is in the form of memoirs, is I think has come out on 2023. Is that right, sir?
Correct.
So he continues to write and continues to inspire. So this is the little bit of a glimpse on the early life, corporate life. Well, he was a part-time author even during his corporate career, and then lost good 3 decades now as an author, management thinker, and literature, if I may say. So here is Sir, Mr. Gurcharan Das, for all of you. And it is such a pleasure to have you for this up-close and personal interaction.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. So my purpose of this conversation is to get a glimpse on the mind and personality of the person, who has charted such a course, who have charted such a course for themselves. So the first question I want to ask is, a difficult student in the class, or for that matter, even earlier, a difficult child for the mother, difficult student in the school. But yet, when it came to your school in US, you came right on top. Normally such students are associated with backbenches. So give us a glimpse of a young Gurcharan Das of that time. How did you manage both of these?
Well, thank you for having me. And let me say that I was lucky that my mother kept a diary, and that came very handy when I was writing my memoir called Another Sort of Freedom.
That's right.
And I appear on page 17 for the first time in her diary.
Oh.
And she says, "This is a restless baby. I had just been born." And 6 months later, she was calling me a difficult child. And another year later, she was calling me a troublemaker. So you see the direction where this is going.
That's right.
And when I got into kindergarten, I used to raise my hand and always wanted to do something that was not allowed. And so my teacher would say, "Nahi, nahi." And one day she said, instead of repeating "Nahi, nahi," let's call you Nahi Kumar. And the reason for Nahi Kumar was because my name, they had given me the name Ashok Kumar. And so she wanted to change my name from Ashok Kumar to Nahi Kumar. But in fact, the more serious challenge came from my grandmother, because my grandmother suspected that my mother, her daughter-in-law, had given me that name because she thought my mother was secretly in love with a Bollywood actor named Ashok Kumar.
Oh.
So this wasn't quite right. And so she took me to a guru. She placed me at his feet and she said to the guru, "Enu na deo ji." And the guru, seeing me seated at his feet, said, "Well, let's call him Gurcharan Das." And overnight, I was transformed from the Prince of Happiness, Ashok Kumar, to the humble servant of the feet of the Guru, Gurcharan Das. Many years later, I asked the Guru why he had given me that name. And he said, well, son, it's good to be reminded of humility once in a while. And then he gave me the very best definition of humility, which was to take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously.
This is awesome.
And that, in fact, became the running theme of my memoir. And I, in fact, the dedication to the in the memoir, which is another, the book is another sort of freedom. The dedication was to the happy few who don't take themselves too seriously. So, yes, as you can tell, my life began early, but where uh, I was in kindergarten when all this was happening, by the way. So, a lot was happening in kindergarten. And one day I came back home with a report card in my hand, and I was smiling and skipping back home. And my mother was waiting at the door, and she asked me, did you come first? And my father was nearby, and he told her this was the wrong question. She said, ask him what he likes about school. Does he like to draw? Does he like to tell stories? Does he like who are his friends? And so very early on, there was a division of powers or a division of aspirations created for me in my home, where my mother was always anxious that I should do well in school, study hard, and my father, um, who was an engineer by daytime, but he was also a mystic. On the weekends and in the mornings, he would meditate. Evening, he would meditate. He was a bhakti devotee, and so he always was more relaxed, and he talked about making a life. So one person was telling me to make a living, another person was telling me to make a life. So that's kind of the influences in which I grew up. And,
Wonderful.
and so when the story that you just told about my getting, I got, when I graduated from high school in Washington, D.C., um, I came back home to my father had been asked to come to Washington. Let me pull back a little bit. At the age of 13, I went to America because my father was an engineer, and they needed some engineers in the negotiations on the Indus Water Treaty with Pakistan.
Right.
And the World Bank was the mediator. They were going to give money to both countries for developing their irrigation potential of the waters. And so um, in that school, when I first arrived in that school, my mother quickly discovered that I was way ahead of my class. And so uh, she went to the principal, deputy principal, and she said to him, um, you know, he's way ahead of your class. He's just repeating himself. Why don't you give him a test and determine which class he really belongs to? And they, as you also said, that I was in a vocational class, and there was a section called college preparatory, and the other section was called vocational. Vocational were people who were going to go and get factory jobs. Anyway, uh, So the principal saw the color of my skin. By the way, this is before the civil rights movement. And my school was 80% white and 20% black. And so he saw my brown skin, and he says, you know, son, in our country, he says, welcome to America. In America, uh, colored boys are not supposed to get too big for their boots.
Mm.
And so you work hard, stay out of trouble. In 4 years, you'll get a diploma. There are lots
Mm.
of factories opening up, and you'll get a good factory job if you get your diploma. And so that's where I must say that was pretty depressing for my mother. I
Mm.
didn't quite
Sure.
realize everything at that point, but my mother was very displeased because she hadn't seen racism
Mm.
like that. Uh, However, there's a nice story which I'm if you don't mind, I'll tell it. Where a few months later, I'm in that class and studying with the kids in school, and one of the girls in my class had a birthday party, and she came from a liberal home, and as a result of that, um, they had invited both black children and white children to the birthday party. And so at that birthday, we had lots of eats. I was delighted to be at my first birthday party in America. But at the end of the eats and all, we sat down in a circle and we played a game called Spin the Bottle. I don't know if you know that game, but it was very popular among teenagers at the time in America. And the idea was that one person spun the bottle, and where it stopped, the mouth of the bottle pointed to the person, and the person closest to the opposite sex from you, you could kiss that person.
Okay.
Now, in the unwritten rule that day was that blacks only kissed blacks and whites kissed only whites.
Oh, okay.
So when it came my turn, everybody got confused.
Mm.
Facing me was a black girl, and they were wondering whether I would kiss the black girl or whether I would kiss the white girl. But I solved the problem instantly.
Mhm.
I kissed black girls when it came black girls, and I kissed white girls when it came white girls, and I got bonus turns as a result, and I kept kissing girls all evening. And that was a peak moment of my schooling days. I think I had more fun that day than any day in my high school. Anyway, as you said, that I got my revenge against the principal
That's
4 years later when
right.
I graduated at the top of my class and I
Right.
got scholarships to Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. I chose Harvard because that's the only one I knew about, my parents knew about. And my parents were already back in India by then. And so I visited
Mm.
them. And on my way to Harvard, uh, when I'm getting on the flight, and my mother has tears in her eyes, and uh, she's uh, she has tears in her eyes, and she's telling me, now be sure to study something useful. And Pramod, sorry to interrupt, but there's some sound coming, and there's Palika's face is big on my screen.
Yeah,
Is
off and
that
on it
is,
comes
is
up.
that
Okay, I'll put it off.
Uh,
something is
oh,
happening? There's a sound coming.
where I see. Wherever there's a movement. Okay. So maybe you can mute yourself, Professor Palekar. Maybe the sound is, since you're close to this, it may be coming. The picture can remain. You don't have to block the picture, but please mute yourself.
Okay. Anyway,
I have muted. Yeah, that's right. Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
So to continue the story, my mother, as usual, was saying, now you study something useful, you've got to come home and get a job. Why don't you be an engineer like your father? And so dutifully, when I arrived at Harvard, I filled out the form and I wrote major, what will it be? Engineering. But my roommate at Harvard was studying Russian history, and he was reading the novel Anna Karenina of Tolstoy.
Mm, mm,
At lunch one day, he says to me, Gurcharan, if you're going to have an affair with a married woman one day, it should be someone like Anna Karenina. And then he begins to catalog the virtues of Anna Karenina. And here I'm thinking that look at this guy, he's dreaming of sleeping with Anna Karenina, and I am calculating pipe friction, mugging up Bernoulli's equation, and all this. Something is wrong here. And so I went to the dean's office and cut out engineering and, and wrote liberal arts. And then I studied Greek tragedy, Roman history, I studied economic theory, I studied international politics, I studied Renaissance painting, Beethoven's music. I even took a course in Sanskrit love poetry. And
mm.
when my mother heard that I was studying Sanskrit at Harvard, she practically fell off her chair. And she says, Hi, hi, Mera Munda, a dead language. Only the dead are going to give him a job now. Anyway, my father explained to her that he's making a life through books, so
Mm,
don't worry. I graduated in philosophy at Harvard, and I was given a scholarship to go to Oxford to
mm,
do a Ph.D. in philosophy. And that summer, I was home in Chandigarh,
mm.
and my mother's worst nightmare had come true. She had a grown-up son at home, what we call in Punjabi vela. He was idle, and we had a nosy neighbor who used to come and visit my mother. And the neighbor would always ask, Thoda munda ki kar raha hai? And my mother would get embarrassed and she didn't know what to say. And I saw the embarrassment on her face and I said, this is not right. Uh, so I immediately started looking at the newspapers and the wanted section in the newspapers. And the first company I found was a company that made Vicks Vapor Rub.
Mm,
I applied as a trainee and I got the job. Those days you didn't need an MBA.
mm,
So and so that's how I got into business quite by accident.
mm.
I had studied philosophy and suddenly from the ivy covered halls at Harvard, I was walking through the dusty bazaars of India and asking chemist shop after chemist shop, एक dozen egg free, kitna mangta hai? So it was a very different life, but I liked the rough and tumble of life, you know.
That's right. And that was my next question from the kind of colorful schooling and even at Harvard, if I may say, to as a trainee's job in Richardson Hindustan then. But you obviously did very well for yourself to rise to the position of MD of Richardson Hindustan. So tell us
Well,
something from that period.
yeah, well, uh, I mean, I liked, as I said, I liked the rough and tumble of the business life.
Mhm.
And so, and frankly, the idea of becoming a professional philosopher,
Hmm.
you know, I felt I didn't want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
it was a relief instead of going to college
Hmm.
classes every day to
Right.
go and do something different. Um, the my memory of Vicks, the the strongest memory was that one year there was a flu, and we sold a hell of a lot of Vicks Vapor Rub.
Mhm.
And we thought we had done good for the country during an epidemic, helping millions of children and families at the time. But at the end of the year, we got a summons from Delhi saying that we had broken the law. And
Mhm.
what was the law? The law of licensing. You see, this was the heyday of the license Raj. And
Mhm.
our license allowed us to produce only so many tons of Vicks. And we
Mhm.
had sold one third more because
Okay.
of the flu.
Right.
So we had broken the law. And there was a jail sentence
Oh.
associated with breaking this law, the
Mhm.
licensing law. And it was 3 years in jail.
Oh.
And so I was asked to come to Delhi, and I waited outside the officer's room. He kept me waiting for 2 hours. I had two lawyers with me who were shivering most of the time. And we were led finally to the office of this, of the officer who had called
Someone.
me in for a hearing. And we sat down, and he kept reading the newspaper while we were sitting down, and we waited, and we were too polite to go to remind him that we were waiting for His Highness. But finally, he put the newspaper down and he says, "Kya?" And I said, "Saab, आप बताइए क्या आपने बुलाया है हमें?" So he says, "I haven't seen your file. Tell me, what's the problem?" So I said, "Well, we've got this summons." And he took the paper from my hand and he says, "So you broke the law?" And I explained to him the circumstances under which we broke the law, that there was a flu and we thought we had done good for the country during this epidemic. And he said at the end, "But you broke the law." And I said, "Well, but you understand." He says, "No, but, tell me yes or no." And I said, "Yes, we broke the law." And he says, "There's a jail sentence to this." I said, "Yes, I'm aware of that." And and then he said, "You chaps in the private sector, you're all crooks. And especially you in the multinational companies, you know what East India Company did to us." And so I said, "But there are circumstances." He says, "No, the fact is that you guys come from abroad. You think you are from a white country, and you think you can be ride roughshod over our laws. No, I'll make an example of your company."
Oh.
So I got very scared. And by now, the lawyers were really shivering. And then he said, "Jao." And so we got up to go out. And at the door, when I'm leaving his office, I turn around and I said, "Sir, you know, this news will get out because it's not every day that an executive of a multinational company goes to jail." And and he and it'll and since we are a multinational, the news will appear in the New York Times, Washington Post, all over the world, in India also, and people will read what happened. And I said, "How do you think our country will look in the eyes of the world when they read that how a company that was doing so much good, you sent them to jail? What do you think that our laws, what will they think of our laws? What will they think of our prime minister? What will they think of you who's recommending this?" He says, "Are you threatening me?" I said, "No, I'm just telling you कि ये होगा."
Mm.
So then he said, "Jao." So as I went out, the lawyers got angry with me and they said, "Look, um, you should have fallen at his feet. You should have begged for mercy. And look at you playing the high moral hand."
Mm.
Anyway, I had a lot of sleepless nights after that, but the government somebody in the government must have got sense into their heads,
Mm.
and they quietly dropped the inquiry. But within 1 week, I joined the Swatantra Party. Changed from being a socialist I became a classical liberal after that.
Okay.
So that's the story. And I also realized that we had such, you know, we were very proud of our democracy. Our democracy gave a lot of freedom to our people, religious freedom, political freedom, freedom of speech, and so on. But it denied us for 40 years, it denied us economic freedom. So we really got our freedom not in 1947, but
Mhm.
in 1991. For that is the real freedom. And in those 40 years, we sacrificed opportunities for our young people in terms of jobs, in terms of careers. And just imagine if there was a young startup like we have. We are living in the age of startups today.
Mhm. Yes,
And if there was a startup, do you think that person would have got a license? Because your market share was decided in the office of a bureaucrat
that's
and
right.
not in the market.
Yes.
Anyway, I just wanted to tell you, you wanted my most memory of those days, the
Obviously.
story. And
Yeah. So you took a stand. That boldness, showed early on, and it paid off for the company as well. So, interesting that from the guru, this lesson that take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously.
yeah,
From father, that make a life while mother is understandable, make a living, but from father, that make a life. So I think all of these obviously have shaped in a very significant way, and it showed in the kind of stand that you took on many things.
right. And well, all I can say is that when you write a memoir, I recently remembered this incident because during COVID period I wrote my memoir,
That's right.
and I I realized that when you write a memoir, first of all, by the way, there's a difference between a memoir and a autobiography.
Okay.
The difference is that autobiography is a chronological telling of your story. I was born here, I
Mm.
went to school here, I got married this year, and all this.
Right.
You go on boringly to the end of your life.
Yes.
A memoir is different. A memoir tries to connect the dots. You try, when you remember your life, when you relive your life, you
Mhm.
try to connect the dots of your life and you try to find some theme in your life. And
Mhm.
that theme I found was this theme of wanting to be free of expectations. Expectations
Mhm.
of my mother, expectations of the family, expectations of my company. I always, and even expectations when I went to the university of what I should study. And
Mhm.
and I found that so that another sort of freedom, which is the title,
Right.
is an expression of that. It's moksha, mukti ho gayi.
Mm. Mm.
When you pay your debt, you say
Mm.
mukti ho gayi.
Mm.
So
Mm.
the word moksha, before it acquired its spiritual meaning after
Mm.
Shankara,
Right.
the moksha just meant to be free.
Mm.
And so I think that really is the running theme of my story, of my life.
Yes,
It's
yes,
this effort to be free,
that's right.
and eventually, of course, it led to my quitting the job.
Doctor Job. Yes,
Uh,
that's, I have a main question there to understand. But while we, sorry, you want to complete something?
no, I was just going to tell you how at the peak of my career,
That's right.
I had become managing head of Procter and Gamble India, and then I was sent to the world headquarters,
That's right.
prepare me for higher responsibility.
Yes,
I was responsible already for India and Southeast Asia,
right.
and then they took me to the world headquarters to give me the job of strategic planning for the
Mm.
whole company.
That's right.
And it was at that time that and that was soon after, by the way, 91.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
and for me, it was 91 was Diwali, the
I
year
see.
of Diwali,
Mm.
because we suddenly we reformed and we throughout we tore up the license Raj.
Mm.
In
Mm.
fact, we had
Mm.
a bonfire, and
Mm.
especially that many areas like commerce, you know,
Right.
and so on. We got our freedom. But what happened was that when I was at the world headquarters of the
Yes.
company, um, I um, I turned on the radio in my
Hmm.
car driving to work one morning,
Right.
and there's a program of the radio station, NPR station,
Hmm.
National Public Radio, and they were they were telling a story of how the reforms in India were in trouble,
Hmm.
and why, because the left wing of the Congress party had reasserted itself,
Hmm.
and they were opposed to Narasimha Rao. They
Mm.
felt, the left wing felt that India had sold out to the capitalists through the
Oh.
reform. And also the left wing was still strong, CPM,
Mm.
etc. They were strong parties.
Hmm.
And so I got very worried.
Hmm.
And also they said nobody's defending the reforms,
Mm.
the
Mm.
newspaper, I mean the radio report. So I suddenly, that morning I was chairing a meeting, a global meeting of Pampers. Pampers is a baby diaper.
Okay.
And the R&D people were presenting the latest uh, work they had done for a superior quality product, and an upgrade. And every country, every region, Latin America, Europe, Asia, they were presenting their plans.
Right.
And I'm looking out the window and I'm saying, is this what life is all about? I'm saying, surely there's more to life than selling Vicks and Pampers, Tide detergent. I mean, P&G made very, very good products.
Sure,
But
sure.
I said, surely there's something more to life than
Mm.
that. And I think I'm not alone. A lot of people in their 40s, whether they are high up in the ladder or they are middle rung in the ladder, they so far they sleepwalk through life, but
Mm.
in their 40s it hits them
Mm.
that there's something more to life than just dhanda.
Mm. Sure, sure.
And so it was an existential
Mm.
crisis,
Mm.
what
Mm.
they call a midlife crisis I had. And fortunately, I had met Manmohan Singh when he was a junior fellow
Mhm.
in the finance ministry.
Mhm.
And we had become friends. Now he was finance minister. And so I shot off a telegram to him.
Mhm.
And I said, why is nobody defending the reforms?
Mhm.
I hear that they are in trouble. They might get reversed.
Mhm.
And I never expected him to reply. I mean, a
Mhm.
finance minister replying to some guy in the US, some person that he knew. But he answered back and
Mhm.
he said, you come back and you sell the reforms.
Mhm.
Now, he had a reason to say that
Mhm.
because in my 20s, I had started a weekend life, which was different.
Mhm.
One day I was uh, visiting home and I told my father, I said, look, I mean, I'm tired of this business world, all the excitement, intellectual excitement of ideas
Mhm.
that I had at Harvard is gone, and I'm frankly bored. And that's when my father suggested you can make a life on the weekend also. He says, you're working for a foreign company, they
Mhm.
respect your weekend. And why
Mhm.
don't you do something you like
Mhm.
on the weekend? And that's how I got the idea on that Sunday morning.
Ah, that explains.
I sat down and I said, I'm going to write a play.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then to give myself Josh, I said, Shakespeare too must have sat down on a morning like this to write Hamlet. So I can do it too. Now, a sane person doesn't compare himself to Shakespeare, but then I was not fully sane. Anyway, so that's how I started a second career, a
Mhm.
weekend career. So for 25 years, I wore two hats.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
wore a Monday to Friday hat, which
Right,
was a business executive,
right,
and a Saturday, Sunday hat, which was a
right.
writer.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
so I wrote three plays, I wrote a novel in my 30s, and I started writing op-eds, newspaper, opinion pieces in the newspaper.
Mhm.
So Manmohan Singh knew about that. He said,
Mhm.
he knew I was writing already.
Right.
So I went to my wife when we were there, and I told her that I was very unhappy, and let's go back home.
Mhm.
And she says, but what about who will pay our salary? And so I explained to her that we had worked enough few years abroad, and we had made, and when you reach a certain level in a big company, you start making a lot of money.
Right.
And I said, we have savings and we have got a home, so we don't have to buy a home in India. So let's go back. And Manmohan Singh says I should come home and sell the reforms. And so that's what I we did. She was a good sport. Our children were grown up, so the responsibility of college and all that was gone over.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so at 50, I took early retirement, and the company was very good to me. They gave me all the benefits of retirement,
Right.
even though the rule in the company, the retirement age was 65, and I was retiring 15 years earlier.
Right.
They were very good to me, and so I left in a nice way
So,
the company, and they also understood that I wasn't going to go and join a competitor, that I
right.
was really changing careers at that point. And
Right.
so I came back, and that's how I quit at the peak of my career.
Mhm.
And of course, my wife said, "Look, they're grooming you for higher responsibility. Why
Mhm.
do you want to leave 15 years earlier? And look
Mhm.
at all the money we would make." But she could see that I was very unhappy. And so that's how it happened.
Yeah. So
And
actually,
that's and my father was actually quite happy. He says, now
mm,
you can make a life not only on Saturday, Sunday, but you can make a life all days of the week.
mm. Wonderful. You have answered two of my questions. One of the things I wanted to understand is that in the 20s, when most of our are struggling with the early career challenges and trying to find our feet, you had begun writing, and not just writing. I think three plays of that period got published by Oxford Press. Is that right?
Yes,
Then
yes,
they got republished by Penguin
right. And
in
they were
America.
performed all over.
All over they
And they were
performed.
performed. There was a Spanish edition of the book, and they were performed. They were performed in England. The first play was
Right,
called Larin Saab. It was
right.
about an Englishman in India, and that
Right,
was performed in England. And my second play was about Mirabai,
right. Hmm.
the Rajput queen
Yes,
of Mewar.
yes, of course. So I know your literary part is, much wider if you go there. Actually, it can pretty much fill the rest of the time. So there are a few things that so one is I understand that, your father's advice that you still have a weekend for yourself to pursue what gives you happiness is how the writings began, and it was an outlet for your nature, the free spirit nature that was there in you. And then, of course, I wanted to understand why would someone leave at the peak of one's career and tipped to be the possibly the next most important, leave and come back to India. Now we understand that Manmohan Singh ji had a role to play. But tell me, what was the experience when you came back and tried your bit to sell reform, so to say? How was it like?
Well, I came back and I interviewed all the people who had been involved in the 91 reforms, including Narasimha Rao.
Mhm.
And so these interviews appeared in the Times of India. Uh,
Mhm.
and in fact, I built up quickly a readership, and the Times of India gave me a column a
I
few
see.
years later.
Right.
A regular Sunday. On
Mm.
Sundays, I used to write
Mm.
every other Sunday,
Mm.
and so I was lucky. But I think the reason, I mean, my writing was different
Mm.
from the usual journalist's writing
Mhm.
because one, it was based on experience that I had. So right working, I would always introduce something I had learned in the business world, uh, and also since I'd written already a lot fiction,
Mm.
my writing was already quite polished.
Mm.
And when you've written a novel and plays, you built up first of
Yes.
all also confidence.
Oh, yes, very
And
much so.
so I was thinking that for your listeners of your podcast, they
Right.
may be interested to know because a lot of the every I mean in the working life,
Right.
um, there are a lot of people
Mm.
who don't like their work.
Mm. Mm.
They did a survey in England
Mhm.
in the 1970s of all working people, white collar, blue collar, managing directors down to the factory floor.
Right.
And they found that 70% of the people hated their jobs. I mean, that's pretty horrible.
Mm.
Imagine you work one third of your life
Mm. That's right.
you spent working
Right. Right.
or more.
Right.
And imagine what a waste of a life when you don't like your work. So my suggestion to people who
Mm.
are at who are at 50 or thinking that they are stuck at their jobs,
Right.
they're not happy. The thing to do for everyone is to think early.
Mm.
And if I didn't have that weekend hat, I used to
Mm.
wear two hats, I told
Right.
you.
That's
And
right.
because I had that weekend hat, and because I had taken it seriously,
That's right.
my weekend career.
Mm.
I had an alternative
Mm.
life,
Mm.
you see. So this way, I would be my suggestion that for for if you are already in that place, you may not have a second place. But the other point I wanted to make is that you can make a life in your job also. I'm not suggesting that you
Mm.
have to quit your job
That's
to
right.
make a life. My father, idea was when he meant wake for life is to love your work and to get so absorbed in it
Mm. Mm.
that you forget yourself, and that's the source of happiness.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
And there are a lot of people, and in my book I talk about a guy called Kamble
Mm.
who came as a night watchman in our
Mm.
company,
Mm.
you
Mm.
know,
Mm.
and how I think he loved his job so much that he would have paid us to come to work.
I see.
You see? Now,
Mm.
I mean, it's a question of attitude.
Mm.
It's a
Sure.
question, a lot of attitude
Right.
that, we make the mistake when we recruit people
Mm.
in our
Mm.
companies.
Mhm.
We recruit by judging how intelligent a person is.
Mm.
Well, if you're interviewing somebody who has gone to IIM Ahmedabad or IIM or Calcutta, you know that he's a bright fellow.
Yeah, sure.
So
Sure.
he'll have all the answers. He
Mm.
knows. Instead, you're asking him questions that, of course, he knows. You should be looking for attitude,
Sure.
not IQ, but EQ.
Absolutely.
So, leadership, since this podcast is
Yes.
about leadership,
Yes. Yes.
leadership is more about your attitude,
Absolutely.
determination,
Mm.
your ability to bounce back from
Mm.
an adverse situation.
Absolutely.
These are some of the qualities
Mm.
that are important at the end. And also your ability to really be happy.
Mm.
After
Mm.
all, you need to be happy.
Mm. Sure.
Uh, and you can only be happy if you enjoy your work.
That's right.
Well, there are two sources of happiness. Very simply, my formula is if you love the work you do and you love the person you live with, that's the formula for happiness.
That's profound, sir. Absolutely.
So that would be my advice.
Mm. Mm.
That
Mm.
it would be my advice to parents, to teachers.
Mm.
The job of parents and teachers is to uncover, like my
Mm.
father was saying,
Mm.
find
Mm.
out what
Mm.
is the child
Mm.
interested in, what he
Mm.
likes, what she likes to do.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And then, because we are not all like Mozart,
That's right.
who at the age of 4 knew he was a musical genius.
Mm.
And by 5, he had written a symphony.
That's right.
Now, that is an exception in life.
Yeah. So,
Most of us stumble through life. We
that's
don't
right.
know what we really like, but we stumble
Mm.
through doing many things.
Mm. Mm.
And for me, writing was a gamble, you
Mm.
know, a
Mm.
gamble. I had not studied writing in college or anything, but I knew that that's something I enjoyed.
Mm.
And so I wrote a play.
Mm.
And
And because your genuine interest was there, it was giving an outlet to what you deeply cared for. I have read a few things, the way this India Unbound, the way the kind of acclaim it received. New York Times, Amartya Sen, Guardian, all of them wrote about it, saying that one is there is a quiet earthquake happening in India, and the way Gurcharan Das has captured it in this book is something that everyone should read. Such raving reviews of that book. So, because it was there in your heart, it kind of the spirit was captured in the
yeah,
way you wrote the book.
yeah.
So, but in terms of choice, you have written fiction, you have written plays, you have written non-fiction. Is there something to this choice of this range?
Well, I would just say that I began by writing fiction,
Hmm.
and I did reasonably well. Or
Of
my
course.
novel was published. It
Yes.
was going to be made into a film by Shyam Benegal, but
Right.
that fellow couldn't raise the money.
Mm.
He
Oh.
even did a screenplay, but poor guy didn't
I
raise
see.
the money.
Oh.
Anyway, the point is that uh, in the I also realized that I was limited,
Mm.
meaning that to be a real fiction writer, you require a bigger imagination than I had.
Mm.
So I did the next best thing. I knew that the craft of writing
Mm.
came easy to me.
Mm.
I,
Okay.
I had found my own voice in writing a book. So if you have a voice, and the voices comes to you, it came in with India Unbound, but
Mm.
then it became even stronger in
That's
the
right.
difficulty of being good,
Yes.
which
Yes.
was the second book, and which
That's right.
actually became a much bigger
Mm.
book
Mm.
than even India Unbound. It
Oh,
became far more successful. Uh, and in fact, it's a even today it's a bestseller
I
for
see.
Penguin.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah, maybe because India Unbound was the first, so it gets talked about a little more. But
yeah.
now I hear from you the second one, and there was the third one. So it was a
No,
trilogy uh,
yeah.
that.
And then you see the other thing was you're right. You picked on one important subject, which is you've got to feel strongly about a
Mm,
subject.
mm, mm,
And
mm,
I was very upset that India Unbound was the first book that
mm.
predicted the economic rise of India.
That's right.
And India obliged by rising.
Mm,
Prosperity began to spread,
mm.
but happiness did not because
Mm.
corruption.
That's
The
right.
problem in India was governance failure.
Right.
The
Mm.
problem was, I wrote a book called India Grows at Night When the Government Sleeps. Of
Okay.
course, my publishers thought that was a bit insulting, so they just wrote India Grows at Night.
Okay.
But my point is the difficulty of being good explores moral failure in the
Mm.
world,
That's right.
moral dilemmas. And
Mm.
it is based on the Mahabharata. So part
Mm.
of the success of
Mm.
why the difficulty of being is a much bigger book is
Mm.
because every Indian loves the Mahabharata. And they
Mm.
want to know more about Draupadi, more about Yudhishthir, more
Mm.
about Arjuna,
That's right.
Duryodhana, all these characters. And
Mm.
so the study of moral dilemmas is what
Mm.
it is.
Mm.
And anyway, the point I think you're making is that I I took my hobby seriously.
That's right.
I honed the skills, and when it
Mm.
was time to quit,
Mm.
I had a second career waiting for me on the platter.
Mm.
And then I made a success of that second career
Mm.
because I felt very strongly about the reforms.
Mm.
Every second column I was writing,
I see.
the Times of India, was about some kind of reform.
Mm.
And and and
Okay.
and frankly, that agenda is still not complete
Oh.
because India, after 91, has grown at 6 to 6.5% a year
Mm-hmm.
over 30 years, which is tremendous. We
Mm-hmm.
have almost wiped out absolute poverty, which is down to 2%.
Mm-hmm.
And we have created a middle class, which was 10% before the reforms, and it's now 30%.
Mm-hmm.
But it needs to become like China, 60%.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an unfinished job.
Oh.
And the reality is, today, we may have grown at a high pace, one of the
Mm.
fastest growing economies in the world,
Right.
but we are not creating the jobs commensurate with that growth rate.
Oh.
And the reason is we have not created an industrial revolution yet. all countries went from an agricultural surplus to to a factory stage.
Mhm.
And then they climbed up to the IT revolution, the
Mm,
knowledge revolution. We seem to have skipped the second stage.
mm,
Manufacturing has let us down.
mm,
Manufactured products from India, only 2% is our global market share of
mm,
world exports.
mm,
And our employment is 45% still in agriculture, whereas
mm.
it should be down to half of that.
Sure.
So we have a crisis of jobs. We still have to do reforms, and that's Mr. Modi's agenda. Has to be. I don't know
Absolutely.
whether he will do it,
Mm,
but it is still a job that needs to be done. So I feel very strongly
mm, mm.
about the job, about where the country needs to go.
Sure, sure, sure.
Whether AI or not, AI will first destroy white collar jobs before it destroys blue collar jobs.
Mm.
So we still have a window of opportunity for the next dozen years or so.
Sure. It's wonderful that many of the questions that I had in this flow of conversation have kind of got covered, without me having to ask them that many. But, if I have to see the courage of conviction right from your school days till the time of taking a call that now I will leave Procter and Gamble and go and do the reform selling for Manmohan Singh and the country, telling the bureaucrat that if you do this, you will kind of have to, you and the country will have to face the music, so to say, and involving yourself deeply in the work. I mean, during you, even though you call it weekends, but in your 20s, you had finished writing 3 plays that were published in Oxford by Oxford Press, right?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
three in the 20s. So, seriously taking up whatever you kind of took up, like they say, coming events cast their shadows before. So it was all there. And it's so wonderful that even at what, 82 now?
That's right.
Yes, you continue to exude that energy and that clarity, that conviction. It's so kind of you to have agreed and share part of your life so generously. On behalf of all of them who have joined here,
I was just going to say, if you have a couple of minutes, I'd
please go
like to
ahead. Please go ahead.
say a few things.
Sure.
One of them is that, when I became a writer,
Yeah.
I also thought I might become a better human being,
Mhm.
but that hasn't worked out. In fact, I have realized that business people are in
Mm.
fact better human beings than writers or artists.
I-
And why do I say that? The reason is that a business person actually depends on others.
Mm,
He
mm,
has depends on his customers, suppliers, employees,
mhm,
and he instinctively understands the importance of being fair and respecting other human beings.
mhm,
A writer doesn't need anybody.
mhm,
I
mhm.
sit in this room, this is my study, and I write from 6 to 12 every day.
Oh,
Whether it's Saturday, whether it's Monday, whether whatever day of the week it
okay.
is, I write every day at from 6 to 12. And half of the time I forget myself.
Mhm.
And my wife has to remind me, you know, uh, come and have breakfast. You better now take a shower. We have to go for lunch. And my point is that the writer doesn't need anyone.
Mm,
And what is being good? Being
mm,
good is being good to other human beings.
mm,
To be good to other human beings, you have to recognize that they exist. And if you ask me, as a business person,
mhm,
I felt I was a better person because I had to satisfy my customers. I had to look after the employees in the company. and also had to be fair to suppliers. We all want to squeeze the supplier a little bit more,
Mm.
you know,
Mm.
and if you do it, if you squeeze them too much, then you'll suffer because you'll get a component that's substandard.
True, true.
So, what I'm trying to get at is that business people get a very bad rap. They're not respected. They're believed to be shysters,
Mm.
profit, going after profit. Actually, that's not true.
Mm.
I feel that as a writer, even after I've published a book, and my book is a success. I mean, the other day, a few months ago, I was at Bari and Sons, which is in Khan Market. And I was looking at the window and I saw that my book was not there. While it was it was selling well. And so I went charging in and I said, Bhai, I'm an important writer. How come you don't have my book in the window? So he very reluctantly put it there. I said, no, no, in the front. Put it in the front. You see, that
No.
ego was still there. The desire to be somebody and not to be a nobody. And so the theme of another sort of freedom
Mm. Mm.
is the title of my book
That's right.
and the theme of my book. That freedom comes when you are able to shrink your ego a little bit,
Sure, sure.
when you can live lightly.
Mm.
Patanjali
Mm.
talks in the Yoga Sutra. Uh, he talks about Laghima in Sanskrit, that Sanskrit word Laghima. It means lightness, being
Mm.
light.
Mm.
One of the siddhis
Mm.
in the Yoga Sutras is that lightness.
Sure.
Practicing yoga
Mm.
gives you that feeling of lightness.
Mm.
That is how we should live, I believe. Should
Absolutely.
live lightly.
Mm.
That's where the motto came, take your work seriously and not yourself seriously. So
That's
all I wanted to tell you is that it's a work in progress. I have
sure.
not achieved, my ego has not shrunk enough.
But you are aware and you are managing it.
Well, but it is a work in progress and I'm
Yeah.
trying to do it. But there is still the struggle to free myself from wanting to be somebody. And,
Sure.
and that really kind of is where I am. And but I can only say that in writing, I've also found another definition for happiness. I told you that two-line definition to love the work you do and love the person you live with. Now I found another definition of happiness, which is and it comes from our ancient idea of the Purusharthas. The Purushartha, Artha, Dharma, Kama, Moksha.
Mm.
And so I feel uh, that I have written 4 books and they reflect those 4 aims of life.
Right.
Artha was India bound, Dharma was difficulty of being good, Kama, the riddle of desire, was about karma and pleasure, and moksha is my definition of a very secular,
Mm.
non-religious moksha.
Sure.
And so, what I'm trying to get at is that I think these purusharthas are human potentialities.
Sure.
We all have that capability for dharma,
Sure.
for kama, and to fulfill those fully is also a answer to a flourishing life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Holistic life. Absolutely. And so wonderful to have those summarized by you before we go off from here. And what stands out for me is that having accomplished all that you have, this awareness that I am the work in progress and I still have a few things to do. I think that's the hallmark of a true leader. And no wonder you have inspired so many, so far. And I have no doubt that the kind of mindset, energy, clarity, and the amount of effort that you put in 6 to 12 every day, expressing yourself. I have no doubt that there are many, many more years and many, many more people to get inspired by the way you think, the way you live, and of course, your thoughts. So, from the entire team of ours,
So can I share something?
just that
1 minute, only 1 minute.
I
Sure,
have to
sure,
run for something, but please go ahead in the next 1 minute.
Yes. Sir, thank Gurucharan Das ji, very, very thank you. My son was sitting with me after hearing your voice. He's just 13 years old and he was playing, but he wanted to listen you. And each and every word was very important. But last you said, sir, very honestly, that yet my ego is not disappear. So that is the beauty of the station, sir, because people, it required lots of courage. So thank you so much, sir. We are blessed. So and we got this opportunity to hear you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really wonderful that a young lad of 13 who was so glued to, listening to, someone of your maturity and age. Sir, thank you so much on behalf of everyone who has joined. And I'm sure a large number will watch the conversation recorded. And we look forward to your continued inspiration. And please be at it, sir. There is so much more you have to offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everybody who have joined. Thanks very much. Thank you.